Hi, I'm Daniel Hylton. Well, we have influenza in the house, and it's spitting snow outside, so it must be time to do a winter scene. Now, I'm on the downside of the flu, so I'm not contagious anymore, and it's safe for you to stick around. So why don't you stick around for about 30 minutes, and let's paint a winter scene. Now, this time of year, early winter, when it looks like it does outside, always reminds me of the long, terrible day. And I promise you, if you talk to my wife or any of our 4 children and ask them about the long, terrible day, they will know immediately what you're talking about, and they'll be glad to tell you. But I'll tell you right now about the story of the long, terrible day. Let's see, I want that to be darker up there. When our kids were in school, we have 4 children. We have a daughter, and another daughter, and a son, and then another daughter. Girl, girl, boy, girl. And at the time of the story, our oldest was 15 and our youngest was 8. And we lived on about 100 acres at the end of a country lane. And it was a long lane, about half a mile long. Maybe not quite a half mile, but pretty close to it. And in good weather, they had to catch the bus at the end of the lane. Like I said, the house was at the other end of almost half mile long lane. And they caught the bus at the other end of the lane. So in good weather, Karen and I'd walk them down to the bus, and then we'd go back and prepare for our day, working whatever we were doing that day. In bad weather, I'd drive them down, make sure they got safely onto the bus. And this day, it was kind of like what it is outside right now. Not really spitting snow, a little flake here and there, but very overcast. And so I drove the kids down, got them safely on the bus. And as I was turning the car around, I looked at the northwestern sky, pretty dark and gray. Looked like it might do something. So when I got back to the house, I told Karen, I said, we better wait and see what's going to happen here before we head out to work, because that sky out there looks pretty bad. And now we had an order we needed to fill, but like I told her, I said, man, that sky out there, it looks bad. And she said, oh, well, okay. We'll see. Now, there weren't any smartphones in those days. In fact, there weren't any cell phones. And no internet, so you couldn't get on. The internet was just beginning in places. So you couldn't get on the internet to find out what the weather was. You had to turn on the local channel and have the local meteorologist tell you what's going on. So we did that. We turned on the local channel and listened to the local guy tell us how everything is going on. And here was his forecast. He said we do have snow in the area, but his forecast was for intermittent flurries with no significant accumulation. That was the forecast. So after hearing that, Karen and I decided, well, we could sit in the car if flurries come by, and we do have an order to fill, so we decided to go ahead and go to work. And let's see, I'm going to put some red in here and then some of this color in here. So we decided to go ahead and get our coffee and everything ready and go to work. Well, shut off the TV. She started pouring up our coffee in our thermos, and I got our coats out and everything. We got ready to go. But before we could leave the house, the phone rang. And I was thinking, I don't know, maybe it's where, no caller ID. So I figured I needed to I needed to find out who it was and what was going on. So I answered the phone. It was my friend John. And now they lived about 30 minutes away from us, but he was not at home. John was up in Kentucky. And he was broke down and wouldn't be home, he said, for 2 or 3 days. But his wife had a doctor appointment up in Clarksville, and he asked if I'd mind going and picking up his wife and taking her up to her mother's so she could make her doctor's appointment the next day. And I said, sure, John, no problem. Now, he lived about 30 minutes away to the west in Clarksville. Well, his wife's mother lived in the countryside west of Clarksville. And she lived about 40 minutes away or so. So going to be about an hour and a half drive. And I didn't mind. I'd do it for my friend. And was going to put us in the area where we needed to work to fill our order anyway. So I said, sure, John, no problem. He said, oh, I appreciate it, Dan. I said, no problem. So we headed out to John's house to, let's see. We headed out to John's house to pick up his wife, and they had a baby girl, a little daughter. Pick up his daughter, take him up to Clarksville to her mother's house. And I'll tell you something. By the time that we got to the end of the lane, it was spitting snow. By the time we got out to the main road, it was flat snowing seriously. It was flat snowing. You know, but those are so far away. I think maybe I can do this. Those are so far away. By the time we got out to the main highway and headed for John's house, it was snowing. It was serious snowing. And oh boy, I said, if it's going to flurry like this is not going to go well, because that was a real flurry. I mean, it was putting down a lot of snow real quick. And I said, well, seems to be a little bit more than a flurry. And she agreed. But we'd already promised to go get his wife, so we kept going. Well, it just got worse and worse. And it kept snowing. It wasn't just a flurry. I mean, it was snowing. By the time that we got to his wife's house, there was at least an inch or two on the highway, and the highway was getting slick. And so we got his wife and their little baby loaded up in the car and headed for her mother's house. Now, like I said, her mother lived in the country west of Clarksville, so I was taking back roads. But I was having to drive slow because the roads were always getting slick, and that 1 or 2 inches turned into 3 inches, then 4 inches. It just kept snowing, and 5 inches. I had to go slower and slower and slower until I was just creeping along that road, those back roads, and I was the only one silly enough to be out there. By the time we got John's wife to her mother's house, there was a good 6 inches, and a 40-minute drive had taken us over 4 hours. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon by that time. So we got her safely dropped off at her mother's house, and I told Karen, I said, we got to get off these back roads. We got to get on a main road. I said, let's head east, get Clarksville, and get on Highway 48. Highway 48's a state highway. I said they're bound to be plowing that road, hopefully, or at least sanding it, and we can get some traction. Now, what was worrying us was we were sure by this time, with six plus inches of snow on the ground, they'd let out school. And I'll tell you something. The long, terrible day, I discovered 3 things. I found out that meteorologists don't often know what they're talking about. They can be very, very wrong. And I found out that I can be very short-sighted. I'll explain that in a minute. And I also found out that my children were very resourceful people. Now, let's see. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Okay. The meteorologist was already very, very wrong. But here's where I found out that I'm very short-sighted. Our children got on the bus about 7:30 every morning, and they got off about 4 o'clock every afternoon. Now, we always saw them to the bus because we had that long lane out in the country, a really lonely, long lane. So we always saw them to the bus, and then we were always there. We made sure we were always there to meet the bus at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, make sure they all got home safe down that long lane. Well, because we were always there, I had never given any of them a key to the house. I know, that's very short-sighted on my part, but I had never given any of them a key to the house. So, man. So anyway, we were becoming terribly anxious because here it was, 6+ inches of snow. We were creeping along. Was closing in on 2 in the afternoon, and our kids were undoubtedly gotten off the bus. Now, we had a neighbor that lived very close to where they got off the bus, and another one just around the corner, the Andersons and the Martins. And so what we hoped was that the kids had gone either one place or the other and were safe and warm. Now, that's what we hoped. Once they got home and realized they couldn't get into our house, that they would go to one of the neighbors' houses and they'd be safe and warm. Well, that was our only hope because I hadn't given anybody a key. And that was, oh boy, silly. So here we are, we're headed east into Clarksville, hoping to get on 48, hoping that the county had decided to plow that road. We get into Clarksville about 2:30, 3 o'clock. And it gets dark this time at about 4:30, so we were worried about it. Well, we get into Clarksville, and sure enough, they had plowed, headed south of town, so we headed out Highway 48. But just as we got to the edge of town, we found the snow plow. It and about 4 cars had a serious accident. Snow plow was all bungled up and in the ditch. There were cars in the ditch. There were cars on the road. There were wreckers there trying to clear the roadway, and there we were, had no place to go. Couldn't get around them. Couldn't go back. There was no way to go back. I wasn't going to go back on those country roads. So there we were. And it was getting later and later and later, and we were stuck in Clarksville waiting for wreckers to clear up a mess. By the time they cleared up the mess, it was 4:30, dark. Sun had already gone down, getting completely dark everywhere. And the plow was no use. The wrecker hauled it off. So we headed south on roads that were unplowed. And by this time, there was a solid 10 inches, maybe 12 on that road. Man, I was just creeping along, and we were so worried about our children. Well, now between Clarksville and Charlotte, there are 2 valleys. There's the Barton Creek Valley, little hills in between that, and then the Johnson Creek Valley. We lived down Johnson Creek. I knew if we could make it to Johnson Creek, we could drive down the Johnson Creek Road. It was relatively flat because it followed the creek. If we could get there, we'd be all right. Well, as we're coming down the slope toward Barton Creek, to the north of the Johnson Creek Road, I asked Karen, I said, excuse me just a minute. I asked Karen, I said, is it just my eyes or are our lights getting dim? And she said, no, I thought that too. The car lights look like they're getting dim. So I thought about it, and I thought, well, I know what's going on, I think. I thought this snow, these big flakes, they're wet and slick, and they're wet and slick, and they're sticking to our headlights, and making our headlights lose power. I said, I'm not going to stop on this slope, but when we get down into the Barton Creek Flat, I said, I'm going to stop, and and go out and I'll clean the snow off our lights. I'm not stopping here. Well, she said, yeah. So we kept going, and have snow all the way along here, I think. I'm gonna have a little cabin here. Well, anyway, so we got down there. I'm gonna have a little cabin there. Let me see. I'm gonna have to get snow going off there. Okay. So, but before we got to the bottom of that grade, I'm gonna have a cabin right here. Before we got to the bottom of the Bartonfield grade down on the flat, the lights went out, car died. Everything went dark. And we rolled to a stop. And I said, oh my, what now? I tried the key and nothing. It wouldn't make any sound at all. Oh, I thought, what now? So there we were, stranded. I said, we didn't know where our kids were, stranded on the road. And I said, what are we going to do? I'm not a mechanic. I know very little about cars. So I looked around. I didn't see any lights my way. I looked over Karen's way, and I could just see through the snowstorm, I could just see a light way off there. Looked like maybe there was a house over there. So I told Karen, I said, I think I see a house over there. I'm going to go over there and see if somebody's home. See if, a lot of times farmers, I assume being clear out there, it'd be a farm. And farmers, are often pretty good with machinery. Even if they're not mechanics, they're pretty good with engines. They have to be. But even if not, Southern folk are real good about hospitality. So I figured that if I could get over there, they'd help me back and get Karen. I was going to leave Karen in the car. All we had was our work jackets. Didn't have any real winter jackets. But I thought what I would do is leave her my jacket and along with hers, and she could bundle up in both of them, and I'd get across the field and hopefully find somebody to help us out. Well, so that was our plan. I told her, you lock the car door when I get out of here. Well, I got ready to leave. Before I could get out of the car, headlights pulled up right behind us. Big old headlights. I got out. I'll see who this is. I got out. It was one of those mechanic type trucks. The mechanics drive. And two young guys got out. They looked like twins. And one of them said, "Sir, you having trouble?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm having trouble." I said, I don't know what happened here in my car. I said, the lights got dim and then it just quit. He said, well, okay. He said, that kind of sounds like an electrical problem. Let me take a look at it. He said, pop the hood for me and let me take a look at it. I said, well, I don't really have any money or anything. He said, that's right. We're just out here seeing if we can help people in this storm. So he said, just pop the hood and we'll see what we got going here. So I did. I got back in the car and popped the hood for him. They got up there and they only took a few minutes, and he came back and he said, he said, here's what happened. He said, here's what happened. You're somewhere along the line, you've lost your alternator belt. Somewhere along the line, it gave out on you. And you've been driving on your battery, which is why, he said, you've been driving just on your battery. He said, that's why your lights got dim and the car stopped on you all of a sudden. So he said, I think I've got a belt that'll fix that. I thought, really? You drive around with belts that'll fix my old car? Well, he walked back to his truck, and he came back a few minutes later and he said, yeah, he said, I got one here. I believe it'll fit your vehicle. So he put it on, and then they brought out a portable charger and hooked it up to my battery. And after a few minutes, he said, go ahead and give her a try. He said, see if it'll work. So I did. I turned the engine over, and lo and behold, cranked right up, lights came on, engine roared to life. And he said, well, there you go. And I said, sir, I said, I got a little money I can give you. He said, no, I don't want any money. I said, well, you sure saved us. I said, God bless you. And he said, oh, he does. Which I thought was an unusual answer. But that was his answer. Oh, he does, he said. So they got back in their rig and turned around the other way toward Clarksville and drove off. In just a few minutes, their lights disappeared into the storm. And we were good to go. Now, you can make of that what you will, but I'll tell you something. I have often thought, I'm got a little smoke coming out of this chimney. I have often thought that it's very, very strange, miraculous, that two guys came out of the storm and had exactly what we needed to get back on the road. I call that nothing short of miraculous. It was amazing. But we were back on the road, so we headed for the house. But like I said, it was a long, terrible day, and it wasn't over yet. We got through the flat of Barton Creek and headed up the road. By this time, there's at least a foot of snow on the road. And I'm pushing it with our little sedan. And it's not pushing it very easy. And as we get up there, start up the slope, it's struggling. And eventually, the snow built up in front of that vehicle. Eventually, the snow built up in front of our car into a berm of snow and stopped our car dead. And we were just spinning our tires. So I got out, I had to put it in neutral. We let it roll back down the hill, and I'm very careful not to let us fall sideways into the borrow pit. And then I walk up the hill and I go into the woods, and I find a stick, or a limb or something that had fallen off a tree. And I go out there and I remove the snow off of that, scraped it off, that berm of snow off the road, and tried to get a little more snow off the road so our car might do a little better, making progress. And I got back in, we hit up the road again. Well, it wasn't very long before that snow stopped the car again. And I'd have to ask Karen, but I think we probably did this, I don't know, 2 or 3 times. Oh, maybe 4 or 5 times. Drive up, clear the berm of snow off, get back in the car, try it again. I'd have to, every time I'd have to roll all the way to the bottom of the hill and try going all the way up. Well, finally, one time we made it. We made it all the way up and over the crest. Boy, we were willing that car to clear the crest, and finally it did. But so now we're going down the other side, and we find the Johnson Creek Road and head for the house. I told Karen, I said, I don't know where our children are, but I said, when we get to the house, okay, you know what? I'm gonna have a couple of trees in here. I said, when we get to the house, I said, you go in. I'll get a fire started in the stove, and then in the wood stove, we had wood heat in those days. I said, I'll get a fire going in the stove, and I said, you call. I said, I'm sure the kids won't be there, so I said, you call the neighbors and see if we can figure out where they are, and then I'll go pick them up. Man, I'm gonna have a couple of trees here. Well, when we pulled down the driveway, or the lane, and up into the driveway by the house, the lights were on in the house. There was smoke coming out of the chimney. Our kids were there. Well, here's what had happened. When they trudged home and found they couldn't get in, they'd all given their coats to their younger sister, who had a tendency toward pneumonia and stuff like that. So they'd all made sure she was safely warm. And then our second daughter, Annie, who's quite athletic, she went around the house and checked all the windows until she found a window that she could get into, and that she could jimmy open. And she got in the house and let everybody else in. And Nate, who was only 10, had never started a fire in the stove before. I'd showed him how, but he'd never started it himself. He got in. He got a fire going, so got the house warmed up. And her oldest daughter, Valencia, had made supper for everybody. So our kids turned out to be very resourceful, very resilient. Got into the house and everything was good. So there we were after that long, terrible day. We were in the house. We were warm and safe and dry, all of us. And thanking God for basically a miracle. And I will tell you that I went and got a couple of keys made and gave both my older daughters keys after that, so we wouldn't face that again. Let's have a couple over here. But so that's the long, terrible day, and like they say, all's well as end well. All's well that ends well, and we're kind of like in a little cabin like that, safe and warm with it snowing and miserable outside, and proud to be there. I was so proud of my children. And, they were just as worried about us as we were about them. Yeah, this tree over here needs a little help, I think. Well, I'm going to make it taller now. Okay. Let's pull it down a little bit just to, like I said, with something, maybe there's some brush around the bottom of this one. Something like that. But all's well that ends well, and we were all home safe and dry. Thank God. But that's the long, terrible day. And I hope to never go through something like that again. Well, I'm going to call that good and sign this. And I want to thank you for spending another half hour with me. I really enjoy this when you do. All right. And this is number 12. Okay. Thank you, folks, for watching. I really appreciate it. And those of you that have given me a thumbs up and have subscribed, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. It helps me a lot. And I hope to see you all again next time. Hopefully we'll all be well here and you'll be well there, and we'll do another painting in 30 minutes. So until next time, God bless and you take care.